I'm going to slide us right into a conversation about our LGBTQ legal clinic and some of our policies and procedures. So who are we? So the LGBTQ Legal Clinic was founded in 2009 by Jill Mullins and the Q Law Board. And I'm very proud to say that I was one of the first volunteers in 2009. As soon as I got my bar card, I started volunteering, and I've been going strong ever since. Our first law student summer intern was Adrienne Levitt, who you see on the left there in that picture. As a law student summer fellow, Adrienne is now a public defender, but as a law student summer fellow, our very first one, Adrienne set up the legal clinic, started coordinating attorney volunteers, and made our procedures and our very first training CLE. And a lot of the procedures that we follow today were created by Adrienne, are really baked into what we do today. A lot of those founding values of accessibility and how we all show up and create community as attorney volunteers. So many of those things are attributable to Adrienne's hard work. So at that time, back in 2009, it was before marriage equality laws. It was well before established identity document policies. And our sexual orientation and gender identity protections in the Washington Law Against Discrimination were only 3 years old. They were passed in 2006. So I was in law school when in Washington, we got the right as LGBTQ people to be protected from discrimination, right? Like these are very, very new legal developments. So LGBTQ plus communities at that time really needed targeted and supportive legal services from what at the time was a group of very understood the patchwork of new basic tenets of our lives, right? Things like, you know, how do our relationships work? How does our family building work? And so there were lots of, you know, there was a very small number of attorneys at that time who really had a good understanding, and at that time was very national connections to how our communities, to the legal needs of our communities and what we needed to know. Obviously that has shifted, that has shifted a lot in the last several years as laws have gotten, you know, a little bit more established. You know, case law is not quite so brand new, but our communities still have a really deep need for legal services. So we've expanded our work at Q Law Foundation to include education and outreach, community organizing, and long-term advocacy projects. But the LGBTQ plus legal clinic is still our flagship program and is really how we stay connected to what's going on for our communities. You may also have heard about the Q Law Association. So I've talked a lot about the Q Law Foundation. There's also the Q Law Association, which is a membership organization for LGBTQ plus attorneys and legal staff. We used to be the same organization, and then in about 2008 split off into two for various reasons that are boring right now. They are our sister organization and supporters, but we have different boards and staff and mission. And the community-facing programs that you see attributed to Q Law, things like our legal clinic, things like our Family Matters clinic, things like some of our advocacy, it's either Q Law Foundation or we're doing in partnership with the association sometimes. So why Q Law Foundation exists? Some important things to know about LGBTQ people and our experiences with the legal system. You know, one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that 53% of trans people of color experience discrimination when they go to the courthouse. Discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, or discrimination on the basis of race. A third of LGBTQ people witness some sort of discriminatory comment or behavior related to sexual orientation and gender identity when they go to the courthouse. That's important to know, not just not just for what it means about how our courts serve LGBTQ and particularly QD BIPOC, that's queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. QD BIPOC is sort of an umbrella term for queer and trans folks of color. But it's not just important to know in terms of what it feels like to go into a courtroom, but it's also important to know because 53% of trans people of color have friends and have communities, right? They talk to each other. One of the biggest things about LGBTQ plus communities is that we have these very robust survival networks where we teach each other how to do things, we talk to each other. And so you can assume that when folks are accessing our services, they're doing that with, a fair amount of well-earned skepticism or trepidation about how they might be treated. It's one of the main reasons that we exist, and it is also one of the main reasons that we work so hard to build trust and connection with our communities. So what you can see from some of the statistics on this slide is that our communities are more likely than the general population to experience a wide range of issues, including domestic violence and intimate partner violence. I saw a statistic this morning, actually, as I was working on something else, that about a third of LGBTQ people experience intimate partner violence in our relationships. That's a really high number. We are more likely than cisgender straight populations to experience race or disability discrimination. So that tells you a little bit about intersectionality, right? How discrimination gets compounded when you have multiple marginalized identities. We have about 10.3, and this is low income LGBTQ people, have more than 10 civil legal issues per year. A lot of that is because they will cascade, right? A job loss leads to a housing loss, leads to family instability, leads to consumer issues, right? That kind of cascading. One area where we are really likely to experience difficulty is in accessing homeless shelters. And we are 9% more likely than the general population to be denied access to homeless shelters when we need one. And that puts it at about 10% of low-income LGBTQ people in Washington who report being denied access to shelters. So way more than the about 1 to 2% of the general low-income population. Another important thing that I like to include in this presentation is that 28% of LGBTQ people in Washington are raising children, right? So a lot of times there's stereotypes about LGBTQ populations that we have brunch and corgis instead of kids. And that is really not the case. We are very likely to be raising children, about the same amount of likelihood as our straight cisgender peers. And we are 7 times more likely to have adopted children or be raising children from that are not biologically related to us for reasons that are pretty obvious, but adoption rates, particularly in our communities, are really high. So that can lead to a whole host of other legal questions and concerns. So I want to talk a little bit more about LGBTQ relationships with the legal system. So I use this timeline of LGBTQ civil rights laws, right? When we think about the laws, case law that impacts us, these are sort of the big questions, the big LGBTQ civil rights questions that have, been part of our national dialogue. And I like to call attention to this because I like to frame for you what the questions are about our lives that are asked to the courts, right? What are our big civil rights issues? They are things like, is talking about gay culture obscene, like in the definition of obscenity? Are our life partnerships equal to those of our straight cisgender peers under the context of marriage? Can trans people sports ball? Do we even have the right to be protected by anti-discrimination laws? Should our consensual intimacy be criminal? Are we welcome in traditional membership organizations? Can we be trusted to adopt children? Where should trans people use the bathroom, right? These are some of the questions that are our primary civil rights questions. And as a bonus round, I would like, if you can drop it into the chat, if you can identify which of these questions are still being asked in, or have still been asked in our court since we're halfway through 2021, which of these questions have popped up in our national or state courts in 2021? Which of these questions are still live? All right, I see some stuff coming into the chat. All right, all of them, yes. Sports ball, yes. In fact, with the Olympics, we just had a whole big dialogue about whether and how trans people should be allowed to play sports. And also in Idaho and in several other states, there have been laws passed to attempt to ban trans people and specifically trans women from playing sports with cisgender women and girls. Our colleagues over at Legal Voice have been leading the way on that. Bathrooms, in fact, it was just in 2021, if you see here this 2015 case, should trans people be allowed to use the same restrooms as cisgender people, the Gloucester County versus Grimm case. In fact, that case has gone up and down to SCOTUS a couple of times, and just this year, the United States Supreme Court denied cert in the final appeal by the school district. The school district really did not want trans kids to be able to use the same bathroom as cisgender kids, so they took it up a lot. And so just this year, just in June, they finally said, no, we are done talking about this case. And then also adoptions. The case I've cited here from 2010 was a Florida case, but the Fulton versus City of Philadelphia case that came out in June from our state Supreme Court was specifically, or excuse me, from our United States Supreme Court, was specifically about the major constitutional question of whether a religious organization has to recognize LGBTQ families as just as qualified to adopt as straight and cisgender families. Incidentally, the court said no, they don't have to do that. So I say this, I raise this to kind of show you that, like, how it feels to have some of these basic tenets of life be so contested that you have to go to, you know, a panel of judges in black robes, right? You have to go all the way through the court system. You have to end up in front of the highest court in our country about a question like, where should people be able to use the bathroom, right? That is a dehumanizing experience for LGBTQ plus folks. It is the same for other marginalized groups, not the same, but it is similar for other marginalized groups, right? You know, it is a manifest injustice that Black people must appeal to the highest court in the land to determine whether police officers can be held accountable for murdering them, right? It is a manifest injustice that people who are immigrants to our country have to go to the highest court in the land to determine if they are entitled to constitutional rights and if they are entitled to the equal application of our immigration system in our country, right? These are manifest injustices. And I think what we see in our legal clinic is that while if you ask one of our legal clinic clients, how do you feel about the Gloucester County versus Grimm case? They're probably going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But what they will understand is that the legal system is not a place where their rights go to be vindicated, but the legal system is a place where basic tenets of humanity are so debatable that the courts will consider taking a question, right? It's so debatable that we need the biggest legal brains in our country to weigh in, right? These should not be tough questions. But the fact that they are means that when folks walk into our legal services, they're walking in with this feeling of, I'm accessing the system that treats my humanity in this way. And that's really tough as legal services providers. That's, you know, that is a bridge that is our job to cross. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. Gotta put a little animation in there. So how does our legal clinic work? You can, as volunteer Josh is doing here, volunteer for our legal clinic from the comfort of your cozy home with your cozy kitty cats. Our clinics are on Thursday evenings. The obligation runs from about 6:45 to about 8:30. Our first client appointment is at 7, and we just ask folks to show up a couple minutes ahead of time. Folks find us by making online appointments or calling our intake line. So we have a one-touch policy with our organization, which means that folks only need to make one touch with our organization before they're on the phone with an attorney. That one touch can be, it can be going to our website to make an appointment online through our Calendly system, so they don't even have to talk to a human. Or it can be calling our intake line if they have particular questions or needs, or that's how they find us. The vast majority of folks are referred to us by community organizations and friends and family. A third is Google. But the fact that it's community organizations and friends and family referring folks to us means that our connections and people find us through these relationships of trust. So that means that, you know, any community organization, you know, when you think about how do I refer my friends or family members to attorneys, you're doing that because you trust the destination. And so that's something that we take really seriously, is that a great deal of trust is being placed in us by our communities. As volunteer attorneys, you can expect to receive a schedule and legal issue on Tuesday afternoons. And that gives you kind of a heads up of what's coming. And then we have a Zoom conference room that you can use to connect with our clinic assistant, to connect with other attorneys, ask questions, share resources, troubleshoot, that kind of stuff. And then when it's time to call your client, you call from a protected number. There's a procedures list, so don't worry, I'm just not boring you all with details about it right now. But we have a way to protect your cell phone number so that when you call clients, you're not sharing your cell phone number with them. And then we have a client report at the end that you complete. Feel free to drop questions into the chat as you have them. Who we serve. So the important thing to know about our service is that in keeping with LGBTQ plus community traditions and history, we don't turn anyone away on the basis of sexual orientation, citizenship, income level, or any other classification. We are particularly equipped to serve LGBTQ plus community, and we do that specifically from within our community traditions. But one of those community traditions dating back to the AIDS crisis and even before is that our communities, when we set up these community-centered networks, these community-centered services, we recognize that we are not the only people impacted by the harms of the system that we're in. And so our services are open and flexible. Based on 2020 numbers, about 29% of the folks that we serve are folks of color, and about a quarter are not cisgender. So they identify as something other than cisgender, meaning trans or non-binary. About 34% are women, about a quarter are men. And as of last year, about 36% were from Seattle, although we're seeing that number change quite a bit because we just went statewide from being a King County specific resource in January of 2020. So as we are building those connections statewide, hopefully some of you are from other parts of the state. Then as those connections continue to be built and communities outside of Seattle start to know our organization and build trust with our organization, I think we'll start to see that number go up. So what are the big issues that we are seeing? So obviously housing, right? We are seeing a ton of housing issues and homelessness and trying to hustle to avoid homelessness. We also are seeing, and this is, you know, the housing stuff has been pretty new since the pandemic. The numbers for that have definitely gone up. But we are also seeing questions about relationships ending and parenting questions. That's always been very consistent. Folks in queer and trans communities have a lot of fear about accessing legal support, particularly because our relationships, this is where we still maintain a fair amount of difference from cisgender and straight relationships, is in our relationships, sort of relationship dynamics and our parenting. And then generally economic worries. We see a lot of questions about how do I access benefits? How do I navigate having a disability? How do I maintain my employment if my employer is not following COVID protocols? But lots of different sort of, ways that those economic worries are coming into play. Those are kind of the big issues. We also see a fair amount of healthcare access, and particularly medical malpractice actually is a big area for us. And we also have lots of questions about identity documents and some of the other, and then some other sort of more miscellaneous aspects of legal issues. So what are some of the community norms that exist in LGBTQ plus communities that we need to be aware of? And we talk about this because one of the big tenets of the way that we deliver legal services is that, often in legal services, we sort of are taught to treat our clients like an exam problem, right? So you listen to the story so that you can issue spot. And then once you've sufficiently issue spotted all of the legal issues you think are present, then you then barf up everything you know about that legal issue and go on your merry way, right? And often that leaves clients feeling a little bit at sea because often they've come in doing some initial research about their legal question, right? So you might be telling them things that they already know. You might be telling them things that conflict with information that they're getting from community, and community might be correct. I will tell you, I, for example, learned that our courts had reopened to do name change procedures, not from an attorney, not from the courts, but from the Seattle Queer Exchange on Facebook, right? So because somebody asked, how do I get my name changed right now during COVID? I said, oh, I don't think the courts are open for that. And somebody said, no, I was there last week, right? So you may be delivering information that is in conflict with what folks are hearing in community, and it's important for you to know that. And, the other thing is that we really, based on our sort of community, these deep community sort of ways of being, our attorneys have to be kind of on the same footing as our clients. We don't have better knowledge, we just have different knowledge. And so that's really what we're working to do, is work cooperatively with our clients. So what that means is that we have direct relationships with our communities. We have to see ourselves as interdependent with the folks that we're serving in clinic and accountable to those folks. Because believe me, we have been teaching each other and supporting each other through systems that don't imagine our genders, sexual orientations, identities, our life ways. Our legal system doesn't even imagine that those things exist. And so we have to be interdependent and accountable to those systems. Information gets shared. People will, if they have a negative experience, it goes 10 times longer than a positive experience does, because we want to protect each other, right? So it's important that you think about accountability and sort of, your client as a whole person. Who were they when they came in, and how are they going to leave you? Are they going to leave you better than they were when they came in? Our communities really value knowing your rights, having a working knowledge of legal norms. So we do a lot of community-oriented education. I really encourage you to follow us on Instagram so you can see the kinds of, Instagram is like, we do Twitter and Facebook too, but Instagram is kind of the easiest forum to kind of see how we put things out. We also have an education and resources page on our website that I really encourage you to look at so that you see the things that a community may have already looked at. We really prioritize intersectionality, meaning that we have holistic experiences of injustice. What that means is that we recognize that when we're talking to a client who is, a Black Indigenous person, they're going to have a really different experience, for example, trying to navigate a housing question than a white LGBTQ person. Right? So, because that person is going to be thinking about, how am I going to navigate this issue with my landlord around race discrimination, right? Or how am I going to navigate my power to make a decision about whether I stay in this housing situation versus another one, if I know that leaving this housing situation means that it's going to be harder for me to find a new place to live, right? So thinking about what are the barriers that your clients might be up against because of the intersectionality of many identities that they have. Culturally, we really value self-identified solutions. And so thinking about and talking with clients about how are we going to solve this problem with the tools you have in hand? And then providing informed consent about engaging with the legal system. This is something that's really important to us. You know, we really value working with clients to find solutions that include solutions outside of the legal system. And then if clients opt to engage with the legal system, really talking through what are the expectations, right? How do you navigate the courtroom? How do you build evidence? You know, what do you have to do in order to engage with the legal system? And what can you expect at the end? Those are all really, you know, really important questions to our clients, because we're really working with folks at the very start of their legal process. They may have done some Googling about their experience or asked some friends and come to us. But at the end of the day, what they're trying to figure out is, do I want to engage with the system if I don't have to, right? What's the cost benefit analysis? So I really like this, this cartoon that I came across recently. And it really reminded me of, I think, how what legal services providers are like us are trying to do, and how hard it is to do it in the context of this legal system that we have. So this is very much like what I said earlier, where, you know, we have a legal system that remedies the impacts of racism and capitalism, right? But it doesn't actually address the root causes. And so often we find ourselves in the position of being this person who says, let me help you. In order for me to help you, I need you to jump through these 17 flaming hoops. It's going to be really difficult, and it's going to take more time and resources than you have. Are you ready? Right? And that's, you know, that can be really, really difficult, and can end up sort of setting folks back. And so what we really work to do in our legal clinics is that's why when I was talking about in the last slide about self-driven and self-identified solutions, right? We're not just sort of info dumping about what the legal system offers. We are engaged in mutual problem solving with our clients. Okay, advance this slide. So what are our expectations of our legal clinic volunteers? And I'm going to talk here, this is where we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of legal ethics. So the first thing is bring your best self to our legal clinics. That means, you know, try and get a good night's sleep beforehand, eat your dinner first, you know, and when you are in conversation with clients, do things like ask questions, right? If you have found yourself talking for more than a couple minutes at a time, it's probably time to stop and ask a question. And, you know, those questions can be things like, what do you want to do? How can we strategize support? It can also be, what do you know about this problem already? Who have you already talked to? Being clear, right? And being clear that sometimes solving legal issues takes work, right? Be really clear with folks about, you know, the kinds of documents they might have to gather to show a court that they need an anti-harassment order, right? Or the kind of decision-making that they're going to be doing about their legal issue. Bringing humility, like I said a minute ago, you know, assume that folks have tried a few things already, and ask them how it went, right? Because what that means is, and what that projects to the client is that, you know, you don't assume you have all of the answers, and you don't assume that they're helpless, right? That's really important. And you will have to drive the conversation, right? These, at the end of the day, these are generally 30-minute appointments. We do let people sign up for 60 if they want to. Sometimes people are good at judging how long 30 minutes is, sometimes they're not. And so really driving the conversation to reflect for the person that you're working with. This sounds like it's been really hard. Let me ask some specific questions so that I can make sure I get to everything. That's a really good way of saying, I'm ready for you to stop talking and I just need a couple of really specific things. And I think, doing the, sort of taking charge of the conversation with care. So a couple of things about the RPCs, and I really encourage you all to jump into the chat if you have questions. If I've said something that you're like, I don't know what the hell she's talking about, right? Like, just feel free to use the chat. So the most important rule that we have is about confidentiality, right? So yes, RPC 1.6, right? Follow RPC 1.6. We take it a step further because for our programs, confidentiality means trust. It means someone is coming to us trusting not just that we will hold confidentiality of their situation, that we will not share it in community, that we will not share it with opposing parties, and also that we can hold that vulnerability. What that means is you have to understand our communities are really small. And by being one of a very few providers that specifically serve LGBTQ+ communities, that means that it's very easy for us to identify, it's very easy for even by sharing non-identifying details, like in a community as small as ours, non-identifying details can still be identifying. So the tactic that we take is all client details stay under the Q Law umbrella. Now you're going to hear some juicy stuff, right? And I am here for gossip any day of the week. And you may also need to unload a little bit, right? Like I just heard something really stressful. I need to talk about it. I really encourage you to share that. That's why we have that Zoom room for volunteers. You share it with the clinic assistant, you share it with the other attorneys. It does not go outside of the Q Law umbrella because we are in a community that is so small that I remember standing at, one of the, I think it was LIC, one of the like dance party things for queers on Capitol Hill. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer and she said hi to somebody else. And, she turned around and she's like, well, that was kind of awkward. And I was like, why is that? She said, well, that was my client, right? She's a family law attorney, right? You see opposing parties all over the place, right? You often have friends in common. And so I really want to stress for you that like the degrees of separation are very few in our communities. And even the fact that an appointment occurred with our clinic can be harmful if it travels around those degrees, right? So we don't even share that someone has accessed our services. So I hope I have made that sufficiently clear. It is incredibly important to us because the moment that we lose that trust with our communities, we are just a bunch of lawyers in a room talking to each other because people will not come to a resource they don't trust. A quick note about conflicts. For those of you that are super worried about conflicts and conflict checking, RPC 6.5 specifically applies to nonprofit and limited legal services like ours. So you do not need to run a formal conflict check. You just need to look at the schedule you get ahead of time for any names that you recognize. If you're super worried, some of our attorneys will exclude subject areas. And so, for example, if you practice in workers' comp law, maybe you just want to say, please don't give me anybody related to workers' comp. I can do every name change in the universe, but don't give me workers' comp. And conflicts can be both personal and representational, right? So it could be that you have, a mutual client or mutual opposing party or something like that. It can also be, I know this person through community, right? And so if you see one of those conflicts, let us know right away because we can absolutely help. We have screening mechanisms that we put into place. We can swap attorneys around. The nice thing about phone clinics is that you don't have to worry about clients showing up and seeing the other attorney, but we do make sure that to flag when there's a conflict so that we can separate out attorneys who need to not know that a client is accessing our legal clinic or other types of situations like that. Be really clear about scope of representation. And it's built into our intake form, but just remember that scope of representation is in the eye of the client. We do not do courtroom representation. I'm going to be very clear about that. We do not do courtroom representation. We also don't do long-term representation in like 99.999% of circumstances. We use community networks and we use referrals. So not every client is going to know what it means not every client is going to know what it means to be able to get, like, they're not going to know what a legal clinic is and know that, that means, 30-minute consultation with an attorney, right? We definitely have had folks come to us and say, I thought I was getting a lawyer, right? And so you want to be very clear about the scope of representation at the beginning, and then you use your community networks and referrals, and we have some support for that as well. Okay. Do your paperwork like somebody reads it, because we do. So we can look at the intake form really quickly. If you, let's see, how am I going to do this? I'm going to share it. You'll have a link to it in your, you'll have a link to it in the email that you get prior to your appointments. But you can see, hopefully everybody can see the legal clinic intake form. You can see you mark down information about the client. Most of that you have ahead of time. And then you'll see here, we have a required section where you check in with the client, and you, before you've dived into the legal question at all, and you note that we're providing advice and consultation. So we don't represent them outside of the clinic time, so they know that the representation is done. And we also disclose that they have attorney-client privilege. We do ask them to share if there's an opposing party. Sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not. So it's not a required field. And then you enter in the client's initials to designate that you have gone through that scope of representation with them. And then from there, we have some additional demographic questions and legal summary questions, but those are pretty self-explanatory. So what you can expect from us. As I mentioned, you get the schedule ahead of time, usually on Tuesday afternoons. We do scheduling quarterly, so that means that at approximately every quarter, you'll get an email from us saying, here's the dates of the next clinics. Can you please mark down when you're not available? And then we, sort of design a schedule out of that. We will send you a reminder about a week ahead of time that the clinic is happening. I do encourage you to put it in your calendar though, just because sometimes our reminders go out a little late. But you get the schedule ahead of time that designates, what everything looks like that top graphic in our little wheel. We also work on, we have a robust legal law student clinic extern program where our law students provide legal memos for a lot of different situations, not every single one. So you're not always going to get a memo ahead of time about the legal issue, but you often will. And that's because, and this addresses a question that someone shared in the chat, that's because you will see a pretty wide range of legal issues. If you are a family law attorney, bless you, we are really excited to have you. We do schedule at least one designated family law attorney for every clinic because we still get so many questions about that. Usually that's family law plus domestic violence and survivor issues, which we'll cover later today. But the remainder are general legal issues. And so we can certainly cover, cover legal issues where you might have a conflict, but generally speaking, even our family law attorneys are sometimes handling general legal issues that are outside of your normal area of practice. The thing I really want to stress for you is that we are advancing the ball for our clients about 5 yards, right? So if you are worried, oh my gosh, in order to advise a client on their landlord-tenant issue, I'm going to need to know everything about the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act and how a court proceeding goes from start to finish, I would say you're probably getting ahead of yourself. What you need to do is to read what the client issue presented is and think about, how do I get this person to their next step? If you try to give them 5 steps at a time, that's not going to be super useful for them, because I guarantee you they'll probably lose track of the 5 steps. You're really worried about what's the next step. And we have legal research materials. We have a whole host of resources and referral destinations for clients. That's what this graphic is on the left-hand side, is we have a referral and resource cheat sheet for all kinds of different legal resources. We also really heavily rely on Washington law help to support our volunteers as well. So don't fret. You do not need to be a subject matter expert. In fact, most of our attorneys are not. So some other perks: you get to report for CLE credits the time that you spend advising. We also have additional CLE credits available from our online video bank, which is not quite up yet, but is coming soon. As I mentioned, we give really in-depth support with referrals and client follow-ups. And that doesn't mean like if you meet with a client, oh my gosh, now you're responsible for sending them X, Y, and Z thing and, blah, blah, blah. We handle that. So we ask you to just kind of put together, and this is in the intake form that I showed you just a minute ago. We ask you to kind of designate, does the client need additional stuff? Were you talking, for example, about a resource on Washington law help and they need the link sent to them? Right, all of those things, we will handle sending that out to the client. You do not have to email the clients directly, in part because that's a lot of work, and in part because we don't need you to have a one-on-one relationship with the client. We pass all of the information to and from the clients through our Clinic at Q Law Foundation email, so that you don't run the risk of having of accidentally establishing an attorney-client relationship between you and the client directly. It's all through the legal clinic. We have no minimum requirements for participation either. We do, like I said, we do scheduling quarterly, but if you want to sit out a quarter, that's totally fine. Okay, last point in this presentation is, what are our volunteer training requirements, right? What's the baseline of what you need to do in order to get started? So the first thing that you need to do, congratulations, you are 30% of the way done, is watch this and participate in this training on policies, procedures, and ethics. Yay, you finished. You also need to finish our next 2 trainings today, which is advising with authenticity around trans-informed and anti-racist client consulting practices, and trauma-informed interview skills. Those are the only 3 things that you must watch before you get on the phone with a client. The remainder are sort of subject matter areas, and those are available if you have a client who comes up with those subject matter areas, but it's not required in order to start participating. The next thing you need to do is fill out our new volunteer form. This link will also be provided in our follow-up email, but go ahead and fill that out, and it just tells us who you are, what you're interested in, what any conflict areas are that you might be, gives us your email address, right? So that shows us that you are good to go. And then we have you shadow 1 clinic appointment with an experienced attorney. Many of our attorney volunteers have been volunteering for, many of them as many as 10 years, some closer to 5, but we have a really deeply experienced attorney base. And so you have the opportunity to shadow at least once, more than once if you want to, with a more experienced attorney. So that you can really feel comfortable with these client engagement skills, and and feel comfortable with this, the weirdness of having a 30-minute conversation with someone about a deep legal issue. So with that, I do want to answer the question in the chat. If you can't attend all the trainings today, yes, you may absolutely watch recordings of the trainings that you miss, and we will send those out afterwards to everybody who registered for this. Whether you, for everybody who registered for this, whether you actually attend any part of the day or not, everyone will get a link to the recordings. For returning volunteers, if you are 100% positive that you completed the form already, you don't need to worry about it. But if you're not sure, or you think your contact information might have changed, or your conflict areas might have changed, go ahead and fill it out again. All right, I'm going to break us for about a quick 5 minutes, and then we will head into our Advising with Authenticity panel. We have a couple of great panelists today. Paige Hardy, who is one of our most experienced volunteers, and also Kelsey Shamrell Harrington, who is another one of our volunteers. And so be back in about 5 minutes. So take a quick bio break and then we'll get started. Thanks, everybody.